Welcome, everyone. I'm Adrian Miller, Executive Director of the Colorado Council of Churches, representing 13 Christian denominations in Colorado, where our mission is walking together in faith, working together for justice. We are so pleased to do this Lunch and Learn, and it's going to be a deeper dive into the Colorado Black Equity Study that is ongoing right now. It's really fascinating stuff. I think you're going to really enjoy what you're going to hear. The way that the Colorado Council of Churches connects to this work is we have a number of public policy priorities, and racism is one of them. So when we heard about this project, we were eager to support it and help get the word out to people about what this important work is and what's happening and what's to come. Unfortunately, Chloe Duplessis was going to lead this seminar, and she is unable to make it. But fortunately, we've got two all-stars on the team who have stepped up, and so we're so grateful to Scott Spillman and Acoma Gaither to join us today. So we will first hear from Scott. So I will turn it over to Scott, and Scott, you can introduce yourself, and the floor is yours.
I might toss it to Acoma really quick first to just introduce herself and the work she does here at History Colorado before I do a longer spiel on the Black Equity Study itself, if that's okay, Adrian.
That is okay. You're driving the show, so you can do what you want.
Great. Well, thank you to everybody that is taking time out of their day to spend with us during their lunch hour. I'm very excited to just talk to you guys and introduce myself, and maybe we can have some connections in the future. I'm also curious, Adrian, are folks primarily from the Denver area?
Yes, based on the reservations,
Okay.
registrations, yes.
Okay, great. Cool. Great. So my role at History Colorado is that I'm curator of Black history, and I'm really dedicated to exploring the impact that African Americans have had on the American West. So by doing that, I have the honor of creating and helping alleviate gaps in the collection that focuses on the Black experience. And I'm so glad to be speaking with you guys because I don't know if you know this, but Colorado Black churches, there's a gap in the collection. So I'm hoping maybe you all have some connections. So I just want to give you a statement as to why there is a pressing need to really capture this history. The time is really ripe for documenting Black Coloradan history and the impacts that Black folks have had on this region. Many leaders are aging and approaching the end of their careers, so preserving their papers while conducting oral history interviews while they're still alive is very crucial. Also, finding instances of congregations and individuals who have passed who might have descendants is also very important. What really led me to this work is that the history of Black migration in this region is less focused on the national landscape. I actually moved to Colorado in December of 2023 from the Twin Cities in Minnesota, where I worked at the Minnesota Historical Society, kind of doing similar work. But that's why that reason and that history motivated me to move here. And because there is not a single institution focused on collecting and caring for the history of Black folks in Colorado specifically, I think History Colorado is making a strategic effort in capturing these important stories. And that's another reason why the equity study is, housed at History Colorado and is doing amazing work. Um, I'm sure you all know this. Mainstream narratives about the American West often marginalize or omit Black contributions. And by researching and preserving their history, we challenge incomplete stories and create a fuller, more accurate picture of this region's past. And Colorado also offers a very unique lens in which to study broader national themes like slavery, Reconstruction, the Great Migration, civil rights, and urban development, but of course in this Western context. And it also helps scholars and the public alike understand racism, opportunity, community building, and beyond. So that's why this work is so, so important. It offers pride and identity and a sense of belonging, and it also informs civic dialogue and social justice work. So what do I collect? A wide variety of materials, including art, artifacts, books, manuscripts, papers, maps, sound recordings, oral histories, photographs, moving images, and more. Also, if people aren't comfortable in donating original materials, we also take digital digital copies. And one of my focus areas this upcoming year is on Black worship spaces in Denver and outside of Denver proper. So I'd love to connect with congregations across Colorado, in churches, mosques, temples, anything in the spiritual and religious realms. So I want to leave you all with this. What we choose to save today becomes what the future will stand on. So together through this work, we can make sure that Black voices are preserved, honored, and never forgotten. So I know you all have some great insights or maybe leads, and I would love to connect with you at some point. Adrian, I hope when you send out this recording, you can also share my email address for folks to connect with me later. So thank you. Just wanted to give you a little spiel.
Thanks, Acoma. And Acoma has been a wonderful partner for us at the Colorado Black Equity Study. She helped introduce us to History Colorado and has pointed us to a lot of good sources. And now I will jump into telling you a little bit about what the Colorado Black Equity Study actually is. So I'm going to share my screen. Let's see, is that working there? Good. And now is it big? Yeah. No, it's not big. Oh, it's paused. Did that work? Yeah. Oh, wait. So the Colorado Black Equity Study is a legislatively authorized study of Black history across Colorado. There was a bill, state bill, um, 24-053 that passed the legislature about a year and a half ago now, and then was signed into law by Governor Polis in the summer of 2024. And it called for a three-part process that'll unfold over the next 3 years or so. And the first part of that process is a historical study focused on documenting the history of discrimination and other state-based practices that have caused harm to Black Coloradans from the territorial period to today. And I'm going to dive into a little bit more detail on that in a bit. But that's the first part of the study that's housed here at History Colorado and is due to the legislative commission that governs us in March of 2027. And so that's part one of the process laid out by this bill. Part two is then once we've finished this historical study and turned it over to the legislative commission, they're going to hire an economics firm to do an economic analysis of the discrimination and other harmful practices that we've identified over the course of Colorado history. They will do a 6-month study, and then if the timing works out without any hitches, then turn over their economic analysis in the fall of 2027 to the Legislative Commission. And the Legislative Commission will then take our historical report, that economic analysis, and then do their own report with recommendations that they will pass on to the full state legislature. And the legislature will then take those recommendations and decide whether there are any policies that need to be put in place to repair the historical harms that we've identified. And so then that will enter the political process, and our legislators will sort of figure that out in 2027, 2028, and on in the future. But today I'm going to focus on this first part of the study that's going on right now, which is the historical piece of it. And so the historical study is based here at History Colorado. I'm the senior research historian on the study, and we have 3 other full-time researchers along with me. So 4 full-time researchers focused on this project at History Colorado, along with a program manager, Chloe Duplessis, who unfortunately couldn't be here today. And then a handful of contract researchers doing some specific kind of project-based studies. And we just last week hired 4 part-time fellows who are going to be also focusing on some pieces of this. So we've really tried to build out our capacity. And one reason we've done that is the scope of this project is quite large. We are covering all of Colorado history from the territorial period to today. So basically, gold rush until 2025, 165 years. And we're covering all across the state. So not just Denver, not just the Front Range, but trying to address the history of Black Coloradans on the Eastern Plains, on the Western Slope, in mining communities, and now, ski towns and small towns throughout the state. And so that takes a lot of work. And we're also not focusing on any one particular subject, but on a wide range of topics. And so we tried to break that down into 4 main themes that we're going to be looking at, just as a way of organizing the project, organizing all our research, and thinking about a framework for then putting it all together. And so as you can see here, I hope the 4 big themes are wealth, health, education, and justice, or as Chloe likes to remember it, wedge, because that's kind of what it sounds like if you put them together. And so those are our big themes. And then within those themes, we have different topics that we're focusing on. And so as you can see, for justice, for example, we're going to be looking at policing. We're going to be looking at sentencing and incarceration, and we're also going to be looking at a general sense of safety for the Black community, social intimidation that they face, that kind of thing. And so we have one of our full-time researchers, Dr. Melissa Jones, whom we recently hired from Mississippi. She got her PhD from Southern Miss and focused on studying racial violence during Reconstruction. And she's worked in law firms in the past in her previous career. And so she's really perfectly positioned to look into this for us. She's already been diving into old ledgers from of arrest records for Denver from the early 1900s. She's been looking at the rise of the Ku Klux Klan in Denver in the 1920s. And now she's moving into the post-World War II period and looking at the Denver Police Department and its policies of arresting Black residents in 5 Points. We also have a contract researcher who's focused specifically for us in this justice track on mass incarceration since the 1980s, and so is looking at the rise of mass incarceration, how that's affected the Black community, and the kind of political and social and economic effects of that. And so that's our justice bucket that we'll be looking at. Then within the health bucket, we're going to be looking at things like access to medical training and access to medical care. We're going to be looking at food and nutrition, and we're going to be looking at access to parks, open spaces, a safe and healthy environment. And this will be the focus of one of the fellows that we just hired. We hired someone who's got some experience both doing historical research in health and who has worked for the Robert Wood Johnson Foundation in the past, and so has both sort of a historical and a contemporary lens on health research. And she's going to be really excited to dive into some of this stuff. You know, we've already seen in our historical research evidence of lack of Black access to medical training before the middle of the 20th century, really. There were a handful of Black doctors in Denver and in Colorado Springs starting in the late 19th century. But, you know, in some cases were denied admitting privileges at hospitals or not able to practice in hospitals. And so that had a big effect then on Black medical care in Colorado. Then in the education sphere, we're going to be looking at primary and secondary schools. So, you know, the history of segregation in schools. You know, Colorado has written into its state constitution a guarantee of equal education for all. But in the sort of early to middle part of the 20th century, that was not necessarily honored, especially in Denver, where school boundaries were drawn specifically to keep schools more white or more Black over the years. And that resulted, of course, famously in the Keys case in the early 1970s that mandated busing in Denver to try to overcome that history of segregated districts. And so we're going to be looking at, you know, the schools before busing, during busing, and then since busing in this new sort of choice era, and how that's affected Black access to education, you know, both in Denver, but also statewide, as well as the potential steering of Black students into more vocational tracks versus a college prep track, different curriculums that would have been offered at schools that were primarily Black versus primarily white. And then we're going to also look at higher education and the access of Black Coloradans to, you know, primarily University of Colorado at Boulder, but also Colorado State and various other schools. You know, a handful of Black students attended CU Boulder starting in the late 19th century. But the city of Boulder had a history of segregation there. Barbers would refuse to cut the hair of Black students. Black students were not allowed in the dorms before the 1940s. Restaurants on the Hill often wouldn't allow Black diners or would have them eat in the kitchen or out back. And so that obviously affects how welcome students are going to feel on campus and in town. And so that's something that we're really interested in. And then we'll also be looking within the education space at things like school infrastructure, the location of libraries and communities, the kinds of resources that they're able to get, and things like that. And then our biggest theme is going to be wealth, because it encompasses a lot. So one of our researchers, John Valdez, who has an economics degree, is really focusing on our wealth piece. Right now, he's been looking at the history of Black access to banking and finance. And one thing that has been true historically of Colorado is that there's never been a Black-owned bank in the state. There have been a variety of Black-owned financial institutions that have offered a variety of different services, but never an official sort of state-chartered bank owned by Black Coloradans. And that's had sort of both positive and negative effects. To some extent, it's meant that then, you know, Black Coloradans have sort of by necessity then been incorporated into the broader kind of financial landscape. But then it's also meant that have, especially in the early part of the 20th century, but to some extent continuing through the late 20th century and today, sometimes face discrimination, lack of access to credit, to mortgages, to other services. We've even heard stories of people being, denied or questioned in terms of just opening checking accounts and things that we would think of as kind of, regular, everyday, easy to access business. John's also going to be looking at business formation and investment, as well as employment and employment discrimination. One of the sort of keystones to this whole project is this question of access to jobs and wealth. There was tremendous employment discrimination in Colorado, particularly in the pre-World War II era. If you look at census records from before, say, 1950, a huge majority of Black Coloradans are employed in low-wage work. Janitors, porters, low-skilled labor, sort of what was considered low-skilled labor of all kinds, um, cooks, a lot of barbers, and then women were either in domestic service or doing sort of laundry, maid work. And obviously that was not by choice. They, in general, Black Coloradans were prevented from gaining access to middle class, white collar kinds of jobs before the 1940s and 50s. There were a handful of ministers, doctors, lawyers, but aside from that, there were not a whole lot of opportunities for Black Coloradans to get middle class jobs. And so then that, the effects of that trickle into, or don't just trickle, they kind of flood into all the other areas of our study. Limited access to wealth accumulation, then limited access to housing, which then spills into education, justice, health, and so on. And so that's going to be a big focus of our study. And then another big area within the wealth theme is, of course, housing. Here in America, housing, a person's house is usually the largest asset that they own. And so being able to buy a house, and a house that then appreciates in value, is tremendously important in terms of having an asset that then you pass down through your family. Or that just accumulates wealth and that then you have by the time you get to retirement age. And Black Coloradans have been historically, particularly in the sort of early to middle part of the 20th century, restricted from gaining access to sort of free and open housing wherever they wanted to. Here in Denver in particular, Five Points arose as the main Black community by the 19 teens and 20s. But then that was enforced, at first violently and then in law by their white neighbors. I recently wrote an article for the Colorado Magazine here at History Colorado about a series of bombings that occurred in City Park West from about 1920-21 to 1926-27, as the growing Black community in Denver started to accumulate a bit of wealth and try to move out of Five Points to streets, if you're familiar here with Denver, like Gilpin, Vine, Gaylord, moving towards City Park, and their houses were bombed. They had 150 person mobs coming to their house in the middle of the night, demanding that they move, intimidating notes, in one or two cases getting shot at, to try to force them to move, to give up on this attempt to gain access to houses in those newer and nicer areas. And that intimidation worked. It turned back the Black Coloradans who were trying to move into those neighborhoods. And then in part as an additional response, then neighborhood organizations, so-called improvement associations, sprung up in those neighborhoods to implement racially restrictive covenants that wrote into deeds and other legal documents that they were not to be sold to anyone other than the white race. And so that really, I mean, successfully kept the Black community in Denver within 5 Points and Whittier, then from that moment in the 1920s all the way through then the late 1940s, 1950s, when finally racially restrictive covenants were ruled unenforceable by the Supreme Court in 1948. And then in the late 1950s, Colorado implemented a Fair Housing Act that then began to open up greater access to housing to Black Coloradans and Coloradans of all races. And so we'll be looking at, how some of those processes took shape and then what it looked like once there was, at least in theory, access to free and open housing, how the integration of neighborhoods like Park Hill took shape over the course of the 60s and 70s. And then what Black suburbanization has looked like since the 1970s. Because one interesting thing that we found just doing our research, looking at census records, is that Denver County is actually no longer the county with the largest Black population in Colorado. That distinction now goes to Arapahoe County. And to some extent, the center of the Black community has moved a little bit kind of out to Aurora. And so that's, really interesting to us to kind of look at what forces have shaped that, what the push and pull factors have been, the encouragements and discouragements then of different suburban communities around Denver to a suburbanizing Black population. And we have a contract researcher who's working specifically on that piece for us to try to help us understand it. And he's been doing a really great job. Just this morning, he gave a presentation to our team about what he's been finding in terms of city and county planning and zoning and policies around schools to help us really understand what was going on there. And so those are the four big themes and sort of subtopics that we'll be looking at. And then all of those are going to come together in a final report that we're going to submit in about a year and a half now. The report will not be broken down kind of by these themes. Our goal is to then knit these themes together into a chronological story narrative that tells all about Black history in Colorado from the territorial period to today. That really helps show how all of these themes are interconnected, how they play on each other and influence one another, and how those influences have built and changed over the years. And so it'll take, the Black community in Colorado from the territorial period. I recently drafted our prologue that kind of covers the territorial period and gets us up to statehood, talking about, the early Black migration here and struggles for voting rights and for equal access to education. And then is going to carry that all the way forward to today. Because our hope is not just to answer the brief of the Legislative Commission. And so we will then highlight discrimination, state-based practices that have caused harm. But we also want this to be a study, a story that is accessible to everyday Coloradans, that is readable, that people will enjoy reading, and that can be used in classrooms, in high schools and colleges across the state to help teach and expand the way that we think about Colorado history. And so to that end, along with the study, the report, which will be available for free online, we're also hoping to develop a teacher resource sets to make it easy for teachers to take pieces of this and teach it in their classrooms. We're also hoping to do some video explainers, short videos, to talk about each of these themes and subtopics, where if you're wondering, what is the story of Black access to employment in Colorado, you can get, a quick 2 to 3 minute introduction to that topic and to these other topics. And then finally, we're hoping on our website to put up some fun interactive maps and different data sets that we've sort of generated in the course of our research, because we think it'll be interesting for people and for students to play around with that. But also, one final goal that we have for this project, in addition to answering the Legislative Commission's brief and to having it be used in education, is to have it serve as a foundation for all future work on Black history in Colorado, to help sort of, you know, provide a foundation that then other people can see what has been done in this area and then be able to build on it. We're covering a huge amount of material, and in some cases, we'll only be able to scratch the surface on some of this stuff. But if other people see what we've been doing and maybe want to go deeper, we want to provide them with the resources to at least see what we were able to do and then jump off from there. And so that's what the study is going to look like, or what we hope it looks like. Um, and I will end with a few notes on how, if you're interested, you can support our work. And then I'll be happy to answer any questions that folks have. So how to support? One thing that is distinctive about our study, and that frankly has been extremely helpful and reassuring in this year, 2025, is that we do not rely on any federal funding for our study. We also do not rely on any state funding for our study. It is entirely funded by private donations. And so we have enough money to cover the entire historical study, which is great. We're still raising money to cover that economic analysis piece that comes later. And so if you or any members of your congregations are interested, we have information about how to make a donation on our website. But in addition, we are also, as part of this project, we're collecting oral histories. We have one of our staff researchers who's focused specifically on oral histories. And we're trying to collect at least 100 new oral histories from Black Coloradans to deposit here at History Colorado that will then be available in perpetuity to anybody who's interested in learning what it was like to be Black in Colorado in the late 20th, early 21st century. And we're also hoping that those, really fill out the kind of more contemporary portion of our report, and provide us leads and clues for places to look, some good first person sort of lived experience stories of, living through busing, or living through, the era of mass incarceration or whatever. But we're not just interested in collecting oral histories from Black Coloradans. We're also interested in oral histories from anyone who has experienced or seen, some of these big transformations. Certainly, any Denverite who lived through busing and has stories about what it was like to be bused or to go to school, in particular, like in that early 70s period when it was coming into being, that is fascinating for us, or has been involved in civil rights work in Colorado over the years. All of that would be interesting to us. Um, and then we're also interested, Acoma mentioned that she's trying to document and gather some materials on Black churches. We would be thrilled to see any archives or records from any Black churches in Denver and Colorado Springs, throughout the state, to see, what kind of history we can glean from some of those records. So if anyone knows of the existence of anything or is willing to provide access to anything, we would be all ears. And then the final way to support us is that we make quarterly reports to the Legislative Commission that governs us. It's headed by Senate President James Coleman, and he always does a great job of making those legislative hearings lots of fun. He plays soul music before they begin. And they're typically held at the state capitol in the lovely old Supreme Court chambers with the stained glass window of Clara Brown up above. And we provide updates. All of our researchers provide updates on what we've been working on. And we try to get a decent community presence there just to show some grassroots support for the project. And so our next one is scheduled for Wednesday, November 5th at 3:30 p.m. If you're interested, I recommend going to the state capitol. It's a lovely place to be, but they're also offered online. And so you can join just the hybrid sort of Zoom and listen in that way. And they're also available recorded after the fact. Um, and so those are the main ways to support. And I would be happy to answer any questions or talk in more detail about any piece of this that people have interest in.
Well, thank you, Acoma and Scott, for that overview. Really appreciate it. I guess I have the first question. You know, you mentioned that Senator Coleman's plays soul music. Given the state of the world and the budget, is it going to be switching to spirituals or the blues? Do you know? Okay, maybe you can't answer that. All right. Um, so Martha has led the way. If you look in the chat, I'll go ahead and say, what do you expect the Colorado General Assembly will do with the information the study gathers? That is, what can be done with it, with what we learned from it, and specifically, why did the legislature ask for it, and how would they use it?
That's a good question. Senator Coleman can probably answer that the best, but I think the hope is to see what are the different ways that historically Colorado has discriminated against the Black community, and and the reason that we want to answer that question, or I think the reason that the legislature wants to answer that question, is then to help determine what are the policies. If we hope to repair that damage in some way, what are the policies that would do that best? And that's really a political question more than a historical question. And that's why we elect our leaders, is to then try to sort through that. Right now, for the historical study, we are trying to just keep our eyes on the history and then let the legislature do with that whatever they deem appropriate. Does that answer your question?
You can unmute, Martha. Oh, or I can unmute
Yeah,
you.
no, yeah, pretty much it does. Yes, thank you. I love the gathering of history. I think it's important for us to know what the stories are and how we got here so that we can tweak how we move forward. I was just curious if you had insight into, why did they even ask for it? I love that they asked for it, but then what happens?
Yeah, I do know that it grew out of a grassroots effort that started, I believe, in 2020. Acoma probably knows more about this than I do, since she's been sort of around this a little bit longer. But grassroots efforts started around 2020. It first focused on specifically on the question of education, and kind of gaining greater access to education for Black Coloradans. But then sort of expanding as some of the people behind that, I think saw that there's a lot going on, not just education, but that we need sort of a comprehensive sense of what the history is here, and that also that then having that history and that firm documentary record then makes it easier both politically and constitutionally to implement policies to address that, and that then will pass constitutional muster.
Okay, thank you.
Did you want to weigh in on that, Acoma, before we go to the next question?
No, Scott pretty much hit on all of the points. Previous studies that were done really focused on, particular districts and like in education and whatnot. So this is more of a well-rounded, comprehensive study, which I hope will then inspire more studies for other communities in the Latino community and Indigenous communities as well. So yeah, this is the first of its kind.
Great. Okay, is it Bry? Is that how you pronounce your name? Yeah.
Yeah,
Do you want to
that's correct.
unmute and give your question? Yeah.
Great. So great to learn with you all. And I'm also curious around thinking ahead to then how to support many communities getting to benefit from all the research that you are all doing. My mom's a retired public school teacher, and then I'm a faith community organizer. So I'm always thinking about our churches and congregations as sites of organizing and storytelling and generational formation. So I'm just curious if there's already any ideas that you all are thinking about. And I said this might be more of a question for you, Adrian Miller, with your hat on as convener of many faith communities. But I'm curious, Acoma and Scott, on the historical research side, what you all have been mulling over, and then if there's ways and faith communities to then support that.
Yeah, I have some thoughts, but I'll let Acoma and Scott weigh in first.
In terms of sort of how we want to share and then kind of activate people around this study once it's out there. Is that basically the idea? Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. We haven't done a ton of planning yet for when the report is actually out there. But we do have in mind, that we will need to get the word out and have some certainly some sort of PR to let it be known that this exists and what you can do with it. We are currently kind of, I guess, maybe testing some ways that we could do that with we have some community listening sessions that are going on right now. Acoma was at our first one that we held in Denver this past Saturday. And so we'll be doing sort of a statewide listening tour, I guess, over the next 6 to 8 months. And I'm hoping that that will help kind of seed the ground for us, letting people at least know that this is happening, that this is coming, and what to expect from it. So that then when we circle back then the following year and say, oh, we told you we were doing this, and now we did it, that we'll already have supporters in place around the state who'll be ready for that. But I do think we need to start. We've been spending so much of our time just figuring out like how are we going to do this study. That probably around now is when we need to start at least transitioning part of our energy to, okay, now what are we going to do when we actually finish this study?
Yeah, I think Scott mentioned it during his presentation, but one area that I think would be very beneficial in getting this great research out is building curriculum for young people to learn this, and partnering with teachers and schools. But that's just one avenue. Just like Scott, I haven't really, thought about like long-term access to this, but there's a lot of opportunity. Adrian, I'm curious to know, your thoughts and opinions on that.
Yeah, so I think one of the key things is hopefully we will have some kind of candidate forum for the candidates running for governor. And I think one question is, will you commit to implementing at least, when we'll have a better idea of the total number, but say, will you implement 4 of the recommendations, 1 for each of the areas during your 4 years as governor? I think we should get them on the record. And then I think the other thing is, as Scott mentioned, this report is going to be released and then it's up to the General Assembly to start implementing it. So I think we need to hold their feet to the fire. And so one of the things that I would look forward to doing is to have a faith community gathering and let's talk about what we think should be prioritized and let that be a grassroots discussion. And I think we just go for it and have people at the state capitol watching. We at the Colorado Council of Churches, we have a Voices for Justice team that follows legislation. We traditionally have not had somebody fill the role for racism just because we don't have a lot of bills that fall under the racism category, and people are usually doing affordable housing or other things. So I think that there's an opportunity here for us to really be on the forefront and to make sure that some of this stuff gets implemented instead of being on a shelf collecting dust. And speaking of being on a shelf collecting dust, Acoma, I go to a black church, and I've got a whole bunch of sermons on cassette tapes and CDs that may be of interest to you. So I'll blow the dust off those and get them to you.
Let's connect.
Sounds good. Tom, you had some information here, a comment about the national wealth gap. Did you want to expand on that?
Well, just that there are a number of presentation studies, discussion groups around the national racial wealth gap. And so they track this over time and have quite a bit of detail. And I just wonder if any of that data is available on a state level as well that you are using.
Yeah, that's a great question, and it highlights, I think, one of the frustrations or difficulties that we've encountered in doing this work, which is that at the national level, you can get some good data and research about racial wealth gaps and education gaps and different things like that. And so that's at the national level. You can get that good racial breakdown. At the state level, there's sometimes really good information about those things, not always or often broken down by race in quite the same way. And so finding state and local information that is broken down by race in a way that is useful to us has been sometimes a challenge, because you can have the state stuff that's detailed, but maybe not have race information. You have the national stuff that has the racial information, but figuring out how those things talk together is essentially impossible. And so we have been actually just today, one of our other researchers, John Valdez, is talking to the Governor's Data Advisory Board to try to see about information and data sharing across agencies within state government, just to see, what these different agencies have collected over the years that they might be able to make available to us, and whether that's broken down by race to help us out. Because it would be tremendously useful to have some of that. And just in general, Acoma mentioned beautifully in her opening that, sometimes Black Colorado history has not been given the same level of care and attention. And, we encounter that every day in our research. There's a ton of research about the Black South, about Black Chicago, about Black Detroit, about Black California. There is significantly less about Black Colorado. And there are a lot of different reasons for that. But it just means that there's not a whole lot of groundwork that's been done historically. There's also not a whole lot of sources, frankly, that have always been saved dealing with Black Colorado. And so a lot of our work is figuring out, okay, how do we, what sources are available, and how do we try to address these questions with what we do have and in the time that we have. We can't do a dissertation about every single one of these topics. We've got to sort of glean what we can from the work that's been done, and then dip kind of strategically into primary sources and archival bases to fill in gaps. And then, as I mentioned, then just kind of set this out there as a foundation for future work at the end of the day.
And Martha mentioned in the chat, so this will include action recommendations. I had assumed that, but yeah.
No.
Oh, it won't. So it's just okay. So it's up
At
to
least this historical portion. And so that's why it's broken down into three pieces. And so it actually brings up something that's kind of special about the Colorado report and the Colorado way of doing things. Some other states have launched initiatives like this. And so like California was the first one, I believe. But their report is this like 1,000-page behemoth that sets out like 600 pages of history and 300 pages of economic analysis and like 100 pages of recommendations or something, all in one document that they did and, deposited somewhere. And as near as I can tell, then it just kind of sat there. And ours breaks those pieces into separate buckets, so that they can proceed sort of with integrity, on their own terrain, if that makes sense. And so our historical study, we are not going to be making any recommendations for policy or politics or anything. We are focused as close to 100% as we can on just documenting the history and laying a strong foundation in the historical record. And then somebody else not connected to History Colorado at all or to us is going to take a look at that, and based on what we've developed historically, then do the economic analysis. And then the Legislative Commission is going to take both of those, and the Legislative Commission will be the one that then makes policy recommendations to the General Assembly as a whole.
Okay, got it.
And so the policy piece really will be done by the people who should be doing it, which is the politicians, and not by, us.
Okay. Will you at least commit that the historical part will say that slavery is bad? Because evidently up for debate now. Can you commit to that at least on the record?
I will commit to that.
Right. Let's see. Do we have any other questions? If raise your hand or unmute. Okay, I have a question. You kind of mentioned one surprise in that the center of gravity for Colorado's Black community, especially in Denver, has moved now to Arapahoe County. Any other big surprises?
Any other big surprises? That is a good question. One thing that is really interesting to me, and that I currently have one of our, we have a great volunteer here who's really eager to contribute, a former lawyer, and so he like really gets into it when he gets into it. But I have him investigating this gentle swell in the rural Black population that you see in Colorado from about 1890, 1900 through 1940, that you see not just in the places you might expect if you know Black Colorado history of, Deerfield and Weld County, or like the Dry and Otero County, but you see it in like Washington County, Phillips County, different Eastern Plains counties, and to some extent a little bit in the South and on the Western Slope. And it's not a huge swell. We're not talking like hundreds or thousands of people, but you see this rise of, a few dozen Black farmers that then goes away. And so I'm really interested in understanding why that happened, and especially then why it went away. And so we're interested there. And, there are a couple of obvious reasons that affected farmers across the country, no matter their race, which is Dust Bowl, Great Depression, and broader forces of urbanization and industrialization that, are part of the long-term decline of the farmer population in the US. But we're also then interested in the effect of the Klan, which was also then, at its peak in the 1920s. And if you're in a small town and the only store or the only access to credit that you have is a guy who's connected to the Klan, that's not going to bode well for your ability to remain in that town and keep your farm, because farmers always need access to credit just to make things happen. And then we're also interested, then once the New Deal gets in place, did Black farmers have equal access to government programs to support farms and provide farmer relief? Because those things then could have made the difference in terms of farmers being able to keep their farms or having to move to the city and get a job. And so that's one surprise that then I'm interested in investigating more.
Okay. What about you, Acoma?
I'm kind of tangential to like the actual study. So I'm just helping, sprinkle some resources and do some collecting along the way. But that's really interesting, Scott, about the gentle swell of Black agricultural kind of smaller communities. I didn't know about that. So yeah.
Nice. All right. Do we have time for one more quick question if there is one? Otherwise, I'll close this out. All right. Seeing none. Well, thank you, Acoma and Scott, for your time. Thank you for stepping in for Chloe. We're going to be praying for her. So I just want to thank everyone for being here. Again, we're going to put this on our YouTube channel and we'll share it. So for those of you who are connected to denominations and you know of other churches that have racial justice or justice commissions, please let them know about this because I think that we need to spread the word about this. And I also want to thank our co-sponsors, the iLive School of Theology, Interfaith Alliance of Colorado, and Together Colorado for helping to put the word out about this. And so we'll share this with them as well. So thank you, everyone. Blessings to you. We are ending 3 minutes early, so I hope you accept that blessing of having that time back in your life. Again, Adrian Miller with the Executive Director of the Colorado Council of Churches. Thank you for being with us. And
Thank
peace.
you. If Scott has 3 minutes to hang with me, I have an Aurora-based question.
Sure.
I live